Bilstein shocks.
She's gonna ride good. Here you can see the front end, and I'm working on mocking up these Bilstein shocks. Now these are a 5125 series, 12.03 inches collapsed and 18.5 inches extended. So on the bottom here I used the original mount, which is actually a double shear mount, and then up top I made a double shear mount that goes and welds to the frame. It's kind of hard to see. It's just tacked in there right now. It's actually the bracket that I cut off of the when I had to modify the rear brake brackets. You can see that bolt's a little crooked. I'm gonna fix that. I gotta cut the tacks on that back bracket and move it up a touch. But it works good, fits good. Steering clears easily, clears the brake line, and that's all hunky-dory up there. Now I'm working on the back here. Nice do-rag because it's freaking hot in here. It's summer here now, so it's getting toasty and I don't have AC in here. On the back here, you can see what I'm working with is, I believe this is a 5100 series shock, where it's got the standard end on the shock there, and then up here it's got this style. Now I ordered this because I wanted to do something a little different on the back here. So this here, I made this mount. Actually, that's a stock mount off the original rear end. And then I welded it on to this piece of 1/4 inch steel, which is welded onto the 4-link bar. It's actually tacked on. And this shock goes in here, like that. Now you want these shocks to be as straight up as possible, so I'm gonna end up mounting this about like that. There's no other place on this rear axle to mount shocks the same way on both sides because of this panhard bar and because of the bags right there. This is fully collapsed right now, the frame. So when I do these, I set this at fully collapsed, and then I know the collapsed height of this shock is 12.5 inches, so I can measure up from the center of this hole up to 12.5 inches, and I can build my mount based off of that. Now if you really wanted to, and if you felt like a strong man, you could constantly push this shock down and collapse it and build your mounts based off of that, but it's so hard to do that I just go with the collapse measurement. So here's a little geometry lesson for you. Now with the straight axle rear end, you're gonna have one solid axle here, one solid axle here. So you want your shock to be as far out towards the wheel as possible, because when you hit a bump, say you hit a bump on one side but not on the other side, like a pothole, or if you're doing anything out here, this is gonna come up more than in here. So you can't just mount. I could theoretically mounted my shocks right here and right here, and I would have had room with the panhard bar and everything, but that means that, say if this side moves 6 inches, in here it's only going to move a couple inches because it's a lever, so to speak. So it's not going to move equally. So you want the outside, your shock to be on as far outside as close to the wheel as possible, and you'll get the most use out of your shock. Now it's a similar concept with the bags, but in here is the only place that I can really fit the bags, which is pretty standard, and this is a good setup. So here's a good example of why you tack and then check the range of motion before you weld. So here I have this bottom mount tacked on, and I basically put the shock in there, compressed it, and kind of eyeballed the angle. You can basically do the same thing with the straight edge. You can put the straight edge up against the edge of this and have it come down and go to the center of this hole. Anyways, and that gave me an angle that was where it is now, but my suspension was all the way up when I did it. So now that I have the rear end at ride height, so I lifted the frame up, now this angle is a little bit off more than I thought it would be. So here you can see it's in that bottom mount there, and now you can see the angle has changed because the way that the rear end kind of rotates this way, it spins throughout the travel because the radius bars. So you can see that this angle here on this bracket isn't the same as this angle here now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a happy medium, what I call a happy medium. I'm actually gonna cut the tacks out, and I'm gonna tilt it up a couple degrees so it's more level at this height, if that makes sense. But I have to do it this way because I wanted to make sure that this suspension would come all the way up without binding or bottoming out on the shock. Crocs and socks, shock. Crocs and socks, shock. So that's that side. Now the other side is a little bit more complicated because of the panhard bar, and I was worried it wasn't gonna fit, and my theory was correct. Now, problem here, put the shock in there approximately where it goes. You can see that when this range of motion kicks in and it brings this rear end this way, sort of like this, it actually brings that rear mount closer to the front of the car and brings this mount closer to the rear of the car. So it actually is going to hit on the head of that bolt. So I have two options here. I can take this mount and move it back, or I can take this mount and move it back. Now, moving this mount back is not going to make as much difference. So say if I move this mount back an inch, or if I move that mount, move down there back an inch, this mount up here isn't going to make as much of a difference because it's closer to this mount down here where I need to be spread out. So what I'm going to do, so I have this old piece of scrap. I'm going to plug weld all these holes. But I'm actually going to use this as a spacer. It's the same size as this plate that I welded on here, and it's an inch thick, so it's going to space it out an inch, so that will in turn give me an inch more clearance here. It was really close. I probably could have got away with grinding the head of the bolt or getting an Allen head bolt and then grinding away on this bracket, but I'm just going to space this out since it's all tacked. Just cut the tack, space it out, and try it again. So that is why you tack instead of fully welding, and then you check it out and make sure it's all good to go. So I got that bracket with the spacer welded onto the 4-bar there. And one thing of note is to make sure that you actually pull out. You can see here that I pulled out this bottom link bar because the welding that was going on in there gets this bracket really hot, and you can actually melt your polyurethane bushing. So you want to pull that out. The top one up here is fine. It's so far away that it's not going to get extremely hot. But I pulled that out. And another thing that's pretty much common is these are going to be a real pain in the ass to get lined up. You want everything tight fit. A lot of guys will take and they'll drill out these holes a 1/16 of an inch bigger, but that actually creates slop problems, and you don't want slop. So I always try and keep it a precise fit, which takes longer for assembly because you gotta sort of finicky with it, use some pry bars, use some afro engineering to get the bolts in, but the end result is better and stronger and less slop. So I'm just going to put this back together, install the shocks with some grade 5 hardware, and she'll be ready to rock and roll.